Hello, everyone. I still have a few minutes before the top of the hour. The parking lot is starting to fill up. We'll give folks time to join us. We'll get started here in a few minutes. All right, I have the top of the hour. Since I am not sure from which time zones everyone is in, I'm going to simply wish you good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. We're very glad you have decided to spend some time with us here this afternoon. We're going to talk about some tips and tricks to consider when you are not really only doing the year-end closing of Sage 100, but even this can be applicable to any period for which you are doing your closing. Since we have a fairly large number of attendees today, we will be keeping the microphones and phone lines on mute. If you have a question, there is a questions box or a chat window. If you could use the questions box to type in your questions. I've got another one of my cohorts with me today. He's going to help me monitor the questions. I'll introduce him here in a second. But the questions in the chat and the questions box get recorded. And so if we can't answer something right away for you, we at least have a record of that, and we'll be able to get back with you a little bit later. We do have a raise hands function, and if I could get everybody to do a quick test with me, go ahead and find your little hand icon, raise your hand for me, make sure that you're able to do that. And if you've got a question, maybe too complex to type, please raise your hand. We'll call on you and we'll unmute your line so that you can speak your question to us. Awesome. Looks like everybody's doing a pretty good job there. For those of you whom I have not yet met, my name is Mary Hildinger. I am a Sage 100 software consultant for DWD Technology Group. I have been blessed to be with our firm for just a little over 25 years now. And I have spent probably 22 to 23 years doing software consulting. With us here this afternoon, we have David Overholt. David is our project manager. And David, if you wouldn't mind saying hi to everybody, a little bit about yourself. And I bet I caught him off guard. Well, anyway, David's been with us for about 20 years. David has experience as a master developer. So if any of you have customizations, he might have been the one who wrote that for you in the past. So David is an excellent resource. And if you can't get to me, you can always get to him. And if he can't get you an answer, he will find somebody who can. For those of you who have the 3 funny little letters behind your name like I do and need CPE credit, please email Leah Peters. The email address lpeters@dwdtechgroup.com. Indicate CPE credit and also indicate whether it's 1 hour for just the core modules or if you need both hours for the payroll and the core modules. All right, we've done a little bit of a welcome here today and some things that we're going to talk about. Again, since I recognize many of you, but there are a number of you whom I am not familiar with, we'll share a little bit about who DWD and DWD Technology Group is, talk a little bit about some things to be aware of as we approach this year end. We will talk about the order of closing modules. That is absolutely a huge question that I get on a really regular basis. We'll talk a little bit about things to consider when doing AP, AR, GL, and even a little bit of inventory, some of the things that we typically do at year end, if not at month end. And then for those of you who are not sticking around for the payroll, you'll be welcome to drop off at that time. Otherwise, feel free to stick around. We'll take a little break, and then we'll roll the second part of this session as the payroll functionality. DWD Technology Group, who are we? We are a division of a CPA firm, Doolin, Ward, and Dewald, Inc. The technology group was founded in 1990 And we started with a Sage program. I think we started with OneWrite Plus, and then worked our way into some of the Sage platforms of BusinessWorks, grew into what used to be known as Mass 90 is now known as Sage 100. We also do some Sage 50 consulting as well. Our whole firm is comprised of about 60 folks, give or take, with about 25 of us in the technology group. And we offer expertise in manufacturing distribution and accounting functionality. Some of the other solutions that DWD supports besides Sage 100, BusinessWorks, and Sage 50, Sage Intacct. This is an upcomer from the Sage family. It is a truly cloud-based solution. It is still going through a little bit of development, especially from the production side. So if you're in the manufacturing arena, this probably is not ready for you yet. We also deal with not-for-profit accounting, and a product called MIP Fund Accounting is out there that we have a number of clients with whom we work. Sage Fixed Assets. Anybody who is keeping track of their depreciation may be familiar with this product. We also have Sage HRMS, which is a human resource management solution, and Sage CRM, a contact resource management system that integrates directly with Sage 100. What do we do? Software services. We do training and support and setup. We do software upgrades. As I mentioned, David and a team of individuals work on customizations. We do a lot of report writing and data conversion. We've got some folks on the team that are very adept at systems integration and barcode solutions. We also deal with business intelligence tools, things like Sage Power, or with Power BI and Sage Alerts and Workflows. A lot of manufacturing, various work order scanning and efficiencies and warehouse automations. So a lot of tools that are out there that you can integrate with your Sage 100 solution. Just as a side note, we also have an IT networking team, and some of the features that they offer are managed solutions. If you don't have an internal IT staff, we can be that staff for you. We've got some very experienced, very heavily certified network engineers. We also deal with a lot of the security and backup systems. We can help you get those deployed in your organizations. All right. As time has elapsed over the past few years, Sage has been doing some updating to its payroll and even a little bit to the accounts payable, where we deal with our 1099s. And for those of you who've been around the product for a little while, we used to talk about these three-letter acronyms, the IRD and the TTUs. You see the big red circle slash. That's really an indication that Sage is not using that direction anymore. We have to be able to be on a current version of Sage 2018 or newer because of the whole payroll tax situation and the new 1099 forms, new, not new, the 1099 NEC that came back into play last year. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we proceed here this afternoon. So we aren't really going to focus on either of those, but I just want anybody who's familiar with that terminology, that's really not applicable anymore. And similarly, do I need to install that IRD? Nope. If you're on a current enough version, then there is no more IRD that we really have to deal with. What versions of Sage 100 are supported? We've got our little rolling timeline here, and we know that the current version of Sage 100 is version 2021 or 7.0. Payroll is actually into 2.1, so Payroll 2.21. Those were released earlier this year, and they will be viable through 2024. And as you see, each year prior's version has an obsolescence date that starts falling back a year at a time. So if we look at this little chart, Sage 2018 is technically obsoleted at this point as far as Sage support is concerned. I know there are a number of you who are still running that version, and we'll be working with you to help you get that updated in the coming months. So, Sage 100, I have to close my modules. How do I do it? That's probably my biggest question. And which modules do I do first? Well, the normal steps that I recommend to users is, first of all, make a copy of your company. We can do that through our company maintenance copy function. The reason I suggest that is if during the closing something catastrophic happens, that data probably will get corrupted, and it's just as easy to restore that copy from company maintenance as it would be to go get a backup from your backup system. Once we have that backup created or that copy of your company created, we look at the modules and how those modules interrelate with other modules. So if you notice, bill of materials is the first module that we would typically close because that module is not impacted by very many other modules. So we could close bill of materials first. If we were doing the older work order processing module, we would close that. There's production management, which is the replacement for the work order processing module. We've got a barcode module out there that helps facilitate the interface to the various functions in Sage 100 that if I want to use a barcode scanner, I'll want to have that configured as well. Purchase order, that's usually the first module of any substance that needs to get closed. Then following that would be the sales order module. And because purchase order and sales order get fed by the inventory module, then you would close inventory next. If you're using the material requirements or the inventory requirements planning, those would be next. Time card technically is an obsoleted module because that got replaced with the advent of the 2.2 payroll functionality. Payroll, you don't close it monthly, but you certainly close it quarterly. So that one on a month-to-month basis might be an optional module that you would worry about closing. And then we get into our core accounting modules, receivables, payables, job cost, and general ledger. Generally, we do the GL module last because as soon as that module closes, that we are no longer allowed to post into those closed periods. So what happens? What does it mean when we close accounts payable? What are the things that are going on? What are some things that I need to do? First off, you would want to make sure that all of your data entry is posted, and that also applies to the modules which are related, including purchase order, job cost, work order, etc. You would want to consider printing your reports at the fiscal year end, and ideally, if you can run those right at the end of the year, that would be delightful, because that is going to give you a baseline in case somebody comes back around and posts things that are backdated into the year that we're working to close. So some examples of some reports, the aging report, that's always a killer report. We like to know what is it that we owe people. The AP trial balance report. This report I get a lot of questions about. What is it? Why is it different? Oftentimes controllers freak out when they see the words trial balance, even though it's an AP trial balance report. What this report is, it's not an insight into the general ledger specifically, but it is an insight to the invoices and payments that were created and dated with a general ledger posting date within the period in question. The difference between it and the aging report is that the aging report looks at the document date. What's the invoice date that I put on that transaction? The AP trial balance report says on what date did this get posted to the GL. Oh, another report that would be maybe helpful, the check history report, especially if you have a situation where you have to account for each and every check number. Some organizations do not have to be that detailed, but there are some who do. Some other reports that we look at, the vendor purchase analysis, the monthly purchase analysis, perhaps the accounts payable analysis, and then we've got that check history report based on, that can be based on the option of the number of months to retain that check history. So all of these tools are available. You may or may not use any or all of them, but the recommendation is get these reports run prior to performing the period end processing functionality. It will just make it a little bit easier, and the close process will occur a little bit more quickly. I forgot to make an announcement, and I just got reminded of this. I am recording this session today, and we will be sending a copy of the recording out to everyone. So you are welcome to take notes if you wish. You're also welcome to just sit back and enjoy the ride. Thank you for bringing that up. I meant to say something about that a little bit earlier. So with the closing of the accounts payable module, what happens, and especially what happens at year end? In the options setting for the accounts payable module, depending on what version you're on, Sage will look at either what's called the number of days or perhaps the number of months to retain paid invoices. What does that mean? Retaining paid invoices. Effectively, Sage keeps vendor invoices in two different places. One is what is called the open invoice file, and that's the data that you get to see when you go into your vendor maintenance and you want to take a quick view at what invoice activity has occurred. The other file that Sage stores this information is an AP invoice history file. And that information does not go away until we ask it to go away, or we've had quite whatever number of years that we want to make those things stick around. So the number of days or the number of months to retain those paid invoices means that when I do a period end processing and I roll my calendar forward one more period, then Sage will look back at however many units of measure I have asked to hold on to those things in the open file. And as soon as an invoice is considered closed, then it will hang around only for that number of future closings. So if I have a 12-month retain paid invoices, and I have a November invoice, November of 2022 invoice that got paid in November or maybe even December of 2020, and I am getting ready to close my 2021 year end, because that invoice was paid over 12 months prior, it will no longer be visible on my vendor maintenance or vendor inquiry screens. However, I can still get to that information through AP Invoice History Inquiry. So we're not losing it, we're just looking in a different place to access that information. So what about our 1099s? Okay, 1099s. New stuff happened last year, and a new but new form was brought back into existence by the IRS. And that form is the 1099 NEC, non-employee compensation. For those of you familiar with processing 1099 miscellaneous forms in the past, that replaced Box 7 from the 1099 miscellaneous form. Sage 100 allows us to produce these documents, and we have the ability through Atrix to be able to print or e-file these particular forms. If I choose to print the forms, I must use the red pre-printed forms. If it's a 1099 miscellaneous or interest or dividend, it is still the two-part form. New for this year is that the NEC form is going to be a three-part form on the red pre-printed copy. Recipients, however, may continue to be printed on the blank four-part or four-part perforated paper. Sometimes we call it 4-up. And the 1099s can also generate the Form 1096, which is that summary form. Note, it must be the red pre-printed form. So if you are not e-filing, you do have to get your hands on the red copies at a minimum. And as I mentioned, the NEC was resurrected in 2020. And as a caveat, the versions of Sage that will work with these new forms, the oldest version is Sage 100 2018 Service Pack 10. 2019 Service Pack 4 or 2020 Service Pack 1 or higher. So anybody that's on version 2021, you should be all set. You have all that you need in order to produce these. If you're not on 2021, I recommend that you check your version and figure out what service pack you're on, and if you need a service pack, let us know, and we can help you get that installed. Question that you might ask is, how do I figure out what my version is? I'm going to flip over to my other screen here, and in Sage at the Help menu at the very top of the software, you click on that and you find the little snowflake that says About Sage 100. You get a pop-up box here that gives us the version number. And the third segment here, so we got 7.00.0.0. It's this third segment here that lets you know what service pack you're on. So right now, I do not have a service pack applied to my version of 2021, even though they are available. And that's how you can determine whether or not you'll be compatible. All right, accounts receivable. What's going on with that? This is kind of a mirror image of accounts payable. So a lot of the things that get said here were already said as a part of accounts payable. First thing, basically make sure that your data entry is updated and posted, especially for related modules, such as sales order or job costing. If you're charging finance charges to your customer, you certainly would want to apply those finance charges. If you need to print customer statements, this is a good time to do that. And as I had mentioned with accounts payable, you will want to generate your period end reports, and those might include things such as the aged invoice report, the AR trial balance report, as that's the one that reconciles to the general ledger. There are various analysis reports. You've got a cash receipt report, a sales report, salesperson commission reporting if you're using the standard salesperson commission report from Sage, or whatever other form of salesperson commission report that you might be running. So very similar thought process to AR as it was to accounts payable. Similarly, what happens at period end, especially year end, we talked about the open invoice file and the invoice history file. Same philosophy applies. If you are on Sage 100 version 2019 or prior, then it refers to the number of days to retain paid invoices in days. If you're on Sage 100 2020 or higher, it refers to months. I found it a little shocking that the number of months could extend to 9,999 months. I don't know about you folks, but I hope to be retired well before then. So other things that go on with accounts receivable processing, the monthly cash receipts file gets purged. Temporary customers get purged unless you've had a setting. There's a similar setting in the AP side for the vendors. And that's kind of a snapshot of AR and AP. I am going to pause for a second here and give you folks time to think a little bit. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to chat them in. Okay. Moving forward with inventory. This is a pretty big part of month-end and year-end processing. Again, just as with the other modules, make sure that any of the related data entry is updated and posted. For those of you who are tracking inventory with LIFO or FIFO valuations, there is a negative tier report that you can run that will allow you to identify any over-distributed cost layers. If there are any, and you've got inventory in another cost tier, those two layers can be merged together via the negative tier adjustment register. People are probably going, what's a negative tier? Let me pop over to the software here real quick. And if I go look in my inventory, in the period end folder, I will get this fellow called the negative tier report. And I'm going to apologize up front because I did not think to check this before I offered to show it to you. It just came out of my mouth. But I have success because I have a report that shows me what these negative tiers are. If you ever look at your cost layer information and you see a layer entitled overdist, that means it's an over-distributed layer. I might be able to look at this particular part number and it's going to say, I have a positive quantity or I have a zero quantity on hand, but yet what's this negative tier doing? Well, it's doing exactly what Sage wants it to do, and it's maintaining the cost structure for those items. So if I pull up that cabinet and I look at my 001 warehouse, because that's where I found my negative cost tier, it actually says I've got 990 on hand. But when I go look at my cost details for my warehouse number 1, it shows me this over-distributed layer. This -8 is in the entire count of my inventory items, but it is still a distinct cost layer. We would want to run the negative tier adjustment to apply a positive cost layer and absorb as much of the negative cost layer as possible. Usually FIFO or LIFO negative tiers could do very scary things to your costing because Sage is trying to guesstimate what it thinks the cost should be, since I don't have any of those available at the time. And I have found a number of situations, and David, I'm sure, could attest that there have been a number of times where a client's gotten a really wonky cost, and we found because of the odd happenings with negative layers, things just went really far south. So if you can keep an eye on it, if you can run this on a periodic basis, it can actually help alleviate some of those issues. We do have a question. I think you may see the response in your questions box, but I'm going to go ahead and reiterate it here real quick. That When ensuring that all data entry is updated and posted, are there any lists of all registers and the order we should post to ensure we're not missing any data? And at the moment, we don't have really a comprehensive list, but I would certainly, maybe as a baseline, consider the order of module closing as an order to go through to ensure that all of your data is updated. There may be a better list out there, but that would certainly be plausible. Okay, so we've run this negative tier report and we've made an adjustment with the negative tier adjustment register. It might be time to count our inventory. Some folks do a physical count annually. Some folks do a physical count monthly or quarterly. They may do spot check counts. But regardless of how or when you count, I have had a couple of clients that never counted. But however you do that, however often, there's a physical count process that occurs where we need to freeze the inventory. What that basically does is Sage says, okay, I know this is the point of comparison when you go to type in the counts for me to evaluate for variances. And, excuse me, when you're doing after you've done the freeze, you do want to be careful how product is moving back and forth. If you're still receiving and selling items, issuing items, you want to make sure that you're aware of how they impact the count that you've made, because if I have 10 that I froze and I receive another 10 and then I ship or issue 5, there may be 15 on the shelf, but Sage is going to compare my physical count entry with 10. So I do not want to enter 15 as my count. I only want to enter the original 10. Otherwise, we'll be really far out of whack. So do be careful how you do that. I have some folks who completely shut down for a couple of days while they count, and they don't let anybody transact anything. I have other people who are very cognizant of what they're doing, and they go ahead and count, and they're fine. Along with inventory and the negative tier report and potentially doing the physical count, there's another report in the purchase order module, and many of you probably are very familiar with this. It is the purchases clearing report. And that report is generally run as of the here and now, meaning if it is December 16th, I am not going to run that report to necessarily get back to what my purchases clearing was on November 30th. Similarly, the inventory valuation report, that is as of the here and now. I would strongly recommend that you take snapshots of both of those reports. If you want to print it to paper, you're welcome to do so. You can use the deferred printing, or you can print the report to paperless office and be able to recall that as a baseline so that if any receipts or issues have occurred, then you at least know where you truly think you should have started from. So those are some reports that I would strongly recommend getting your hands on right at the end of the year, in addition to any of the other reports that are impactful for you for period or year-end processing. Once we've closed all the source modules, the next thing that we want to consider is closing our general ledger. And again, any of the modules that integrate with the GL, certainly make sure that you've had all that activity posted and closed. One of the first things that I would do is I would run that daily transaction register as it is at the end of your general ledger menu. Let me show that to you here real quick. So here is the daily transaction register. And if that file is empty, then we have a pretty good inkling that we have everything posted. If we see transactions in there, we want to make sure that they need to be updated. Most likely they probably do, because the source journals already got updated. I had an unfortunate experience with a client that they were having some difficulty reconciling. First thing I did was run that daily transaction register, and there were transactions back from 18 months ago. So that is something that we want to keep an eye on. Once we have confirmed that we've gotten everything closed, as far as transactions from the other modules, any of the journal entries, if you do any recurring journal entries, you can go ahead and get those posted. Any of your annual adjustments, or maybe even period end adjustments, any accruals that you need to make, you want to make sure that you get all of that entry completed before you complete the closing process, because once we have closed that, we cannot go back in and post to that period. I say cannot. Normally we cannot. Technically we can reopen the GL, but again, you want to be really careful about why you do that, when you do that, for what reason. Some other things that you would want to consider, if you're using budgets, you might want to consider updating your budget. There are a number of ways to do that. You certainly want to make sure that your trial balance is in balance. And if you're using the allocation journals, you certainly want to process those, and then run any of your financial reports that you might have. I do see a hand raised. Let's see if I can get you unmuted here. Nope, I cannot. Darcy, can you type in your question? Or unmute yourself and go ahead and speak? Or not? Oh, there we go.
I didn't have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I saw your hand.
Sorry.
All right. So go ahead and run that trial balance. Go ahead and run your financial reports, whether you're running from the standard financials or the custom financials, or from Sage Intelligence or FRX or any of your other reporting tools. Go ahead and get those snapshots. Some people might like a general ledger detail report. That's typically lengthy. That would be one I would recommend printing to Paperless Office or printing as a deferred report. And then what happens? When the GL closes, the net income or loss, your P&L accounts, basically get reset to zero. And that net change gets rolled into your retained earnings account, and that would show up then on your balance sheet. You've got some history settings that you can identify in the general ledger options. How many years do you want to retain transaction history and summary history? Depending on how much time has elapsed since the latest period, then those beginning balances would get recalculated. A lot of this stuff all happens behind the scenes for you. When we're looking into perhaps the next fiscal year and we're trying to run some of our financials and we technically don't have that GL module closed, you will see the appropriate calculations. They will be there, but the actual beginning balances would then get recalculated as the GL periods get closed. That's all right. It'll come back to me. With regard to the financial reports, we certainly can see into the future based on our current period. It does do its true close and does all of its cleanup after we do the year-end processing. So what does closing a module look like? Some of you folks may have never had the opportunity to do this. Other folks have probably been doing this for a long, long, long time. In Sage, let's see if I can blow this up a little bit here. There we go. Hopefully that helps a little bit. I've left my menus in the default order. That's what I grew up on, so I get really confused if somebody gives me their menus alphabetically, which is kind of bad. But if I go to look at a module such as purchase order, and I go ahead, it doesn't matter what your accounting date is when you close your module, because it already knows what fiscal period it's looking at, and it's going to act accordingly. So nothing's getting posted, so this date really isn't impactful. If you want to change it to the period end, you're more than welcome to. When I go into the period end folder, I can see some of the functions that I have here. I've got the purchases clearing report, I've got my period end report selection, and my period end processing. Let's talk a little bit about the period end report selection. What this can allow us to do is to set up a series of reports, or maybe call it a report group, and we can identify the report setting for how we want this report to run. And then when we go to our period end processing, we get offered the option of whether or not we want to print these period end reports. You are absolutely welcome to print those reports at the time you're doing the close. I tend to recommend not to use this option, but rather to go ahead and print those reports before you get here, especially if you're kicking people out of the system in order to do the close. You want to keep them out for as little time as possible. So when I go ahead and proceed, virtually every module will tell you the current period that it is in. It will tell you the period to which it is changing. In this case, it's barking at me because I did not print the period end reports, but it still asks me, do I want to continue? If there is anything that will preclude you from closing the module, you'll get a warning message, and basically you will have to reconcile whatever that issue is before you can continue. Once you get back to this point, and I want to go ahead and do my period end processing, it just takes a matter of seconds. In this case, maybe a minute or two. I would probably say no more than 5 minutes to get the module closed, even if you've got a pretty fair chunk of data and a moderately good network connection. And that process would then simply get followed on a module by module basis, going into the period end. Sometimes that period end folder has fewer options available. Sometimes it might have more options available. And you just very simply go walking up the chain. And here's one of those warning messages that I had indicated. It will generally tell you exactly what the problem is. Invoice data entry is in process. So whoever needs to finish wrapping up processing their batch, they should do that. Now, in this case, the warning did allow me to go ahead and continue. I would be inclined to suggest, if you can at all possible, resolve the issue first and then come back and do the close. And you would just simply follow that process all the way up the food chain. Okay. At this point, I think I have gone over everything that I typically go over with regard to things to watch out for year-end processing. Does anybody have any questions as far as maybe something I didn't cover that you would like a little more information on? If there's something that you would like to see? Oh, a really excellent question just came across. If modules are not used, should we still close them? If the module's not used, I might suggest that you even go ahead and remove it from your company if at all possible. If not, there really is no need to close it since there's nothing really current in that data. Unless, David, you think otherwise, but my gut kind of tells me it's probably not that big of a deal. Anybody else have any questions here? All right. As a reminder, we are offering CPE credit, and if you would contact Leah Peters, she will get the letters out to you after we get them prepared, probably either late this week or first part of next week. And if any of you chooses to exit because you're not interested in sticking around for the payroll part, thank you for attending here today. Thank you for letting me babble in your ears for a few minutes. And feel free to reach out. I'm going to put my contact information back up on the screen here. You are welcome to reach out to me. And as I mentioned earlier, if I can't answer it, or if I'm unsure, or if somebody's better suited to answer that question, I'm going to find somebody who can get you the answers to your questions. Let's see here. Oh, I got another good question here. Basically, we haven't closed in a couple of years. Should the modules be closed every month? That is brilliant. I love that question. There's a couple ways that this can be approached. I had to get the little froggy out of my throat. A couple of thoughts on that. Theoretically, you could go through and close every month, and you could go through a process where you would rotate, module by module by module by module by module, come back, rotate module. With the new BusinessWorks framework the new business framework of the data, it's a little more forgiving than it used to be in the past. And what you might consider doing is, if you go into your respective modules, go into your setup folder and then open up the options for that module. You could cheat, and what I might recommend is going to the 12th period of whatever the immediately prior year was. So, for example, if you haven't closed all the way through 2021 yet, you might be able to cheat yourself and go to 2020 and just start at period 12, do a full year-end processing for that year, and then go ahead and close month by month. Or if you're a calendar year and you want to just go ahead and wait until you get into this next year, 2022, you could probably cheat it and roll to period 12 of 2021 and then do a proper year end. I'm going to bounce that over to David too, because he may have some good words of wisdom. And I'm not sure. Oh, David, I don't know if you are on the phone with the call. Or if you want to just message me, I can relay your thoughts. But if I wanted to be mean, I would go ahead and say, yes, you have to do every month and walk your way through it. But I have not had issues where I've taken it to the end of the previous fiscal year and then just done the closing process. But then that would be good to get in that habit of getting them closed on a more regular basis. Another thought about the general ledger is that, especially in the old days, if you left that GL open, 18, 24 months, there was a lot of potential in the past for data corruption in the calculations, and your years could get a little bit strange and you might run into some problems with that data. That's why we really encouraged, generally try not to let the GL be open for longer than a fiscal year. I have some clients who get their year end done, they close that GL, and then they just sit in period one until the next fiscal year, and then they go ahead and close the GL, but they're closing their source modules along the way. So I've got some more questions that have been coming through. Yes, back to the question about modules be closed every month and then playing that catch-up game. Yes, if you can if you can keep especially the source modules, it doesn't hurt anything to close those on a regular basis. As I was indicating about the general ledger, it might be okay to leave the GL open for the current year and then move forward. There is a good question about having to have everybody out of the modules in order to close. The best thing that I have discovered is whoever's going to be responsible for closing, they would just unfortunately have to pick a time. They might have to do it over a weekend or later in the evening in order to bounce that out and get those modules closed as you can. Another brilliant question that just came in, is there a listing of what modules are in what periods? I do not know that answer. I'm going to defer that one to David if he happens to know something off the top of his head. I suppose we can get at the data. We could probably come up with a report that would tell you that. We could write a custom report. And is there any type of a dashboard to be sure that all the modules are closed? Unfortunately, not a dashboard per se, but again, we could maybe come up with a custom report that would give you that information rather than having to dig through each module individually. Awesome, thank you. Some brilliant, brilliant questions here today. I do appreciate those. And hopefully others have found that information useful. All right, it's a little bit before the top of the hour. We are here to continue to answer questions if you would like. For the folks that are sticking around for the second part of the session here today, if you want to go stretch, get some more coffee or beverage of choice, I have just about 5 till. Let's reconvene at 5 after. And any of you folks who don't intend on sticking around for the payroll part, again, we appreciate your attendance here today. If you need CPE, don't hesitate to request it. And I also wish you all a very blessed holiday season. And if there's anything that we can do for you here at DWD, please don't hesitate to ask. All right, we've got a couple more minutes and we'll get started. All right, I'm going to say welcome back to everybody. I don't think anybody new joined in. So we're going to spend this next portion of the session talking about payroll-specific things to consider. And if I've got enough time left, I'm going to go ahead and I'll do a little demo on some of the Atrix information, the federal and state tax reporting. Again, just a reminder, please use the questions box to chat your questions to us. That gives us a record of it and gives us an opportunity to reply to you. If you do have a significant question that you want to discuss with the group, just raise your hand. We'll get you called on. And again, since I don't think I have any, is anybody new here? Raise your hand. New for this afternoon part of the session? Nope, doesn't look like it. So again, it's David and Mary, and David is handling questions in the background, and I want to thank him for taking his time today to help me with that. As a reminder, if you need CPE credit, don't hesitate to reach out to Leah Peters, and she will arrange to get you the appropriate letters that you need for your records. Since we've already gone through some of this, I'm going to probably bop through some of the intro slides because I don't necessarily want to repeat myself too much. Just as a reminder, the obsolescence dates of the various versions of software. There is a note here with regards to the W-4 form and how taxes get calculated. So again, if you're on an earlier version of Sage, we encourage you to get that updated to a more current version. Sometimes that you have add-ons in your software that we have to be very careful what version and what service packs we can install. Just consult your reseller. If DWD happens to be your reseller, just let us know. We can help you determine what the appropriate version you can get upgraded to would be. If DWD isn't your reseller, make sure that you talk to them and get that advice from them. If you are on Sage 100 2018 or higher, which I hope you all are, make sure that you get the latest version of Payroll installed. Have your IT folks or your reseller help you with that if you are not able to do that yourself. There are new updates that are occurring all the time, and it would be good to have the latest and greatest available. Similar to what we talked about earlier, and I apologize. I just was told that my screen wasn't current. How's that? Is that better? Can you all see the payroll screen on the slides? Okay, I've got one user with that. Can I get a quick hand raise? Who sees a slide entitled Payroll Legacy? Ah, there we go. My apologies. Let me back up a slide here. Just to reiterate, and again, this will be in the recording as well. And I think we were sending out copies of the slides. I'll double check with Leah on that. But again, just as a reminder, because the IRS regulations have changed and how they're processing the new W-4s, you do need to be on a more current version of the software in order to take advantage of that. And again, the ideal version of Payroll, and it doesn't matter what version your Sage is, you can install Payroll 2.21.3. That is the current version of the Sage Payroll software, as that separated out a while back. And now talking about what do we do for the period end and what goes on. Similarly, when I talked about closing the other modules, especially at a year end, you might want to make that backup more as a safety net than anything else. In the old days, this was required because we could not run our W-2 forms and all of our tax forms had we closed into the new year. With Atrix, it allows us to be able to see back into those previous payroll periods. So it's not as critical to make that backup, but I'd still recommend it. It does not hurt anything. Storage space on servers is generally pretty cheap. So what happens during year-end processing? I'm really going to focus only on this right side here because I don't think anybody's running anything prior to 2018. We talk about purging information from history, where the history is set to be retained for some number of years. Direct deposit information is set to 0. Depending on how you've got your settings for terminated employees, how you handle them, they will eventually delete based on whatever your proper settings are. You might notice you've gone through and done a year-end close, and you go back and you look in your employee list and you see a lot of blank names. And it's like, what's going on? Well, that's Sage saying, I'm going to still keep that history for a minimum of 4 years. So you've got these guys that you've marked as deleted. And in the payroll employee file, those records are gone, but the history records aren't gone. So what it's doing is it's still allowing you some visibility to that, but you obviously are not going to be able to cut any checks for them because they don't technically exist. Your time off accruals would get reset based on the calendar setting, and it then rolls your calendars forward into the current quarter for that fiscal year. Using the federal and state e-filing and reporting functionality, you definitely have to be on a more current version. Again, if you're on Sage 2017 or prior, please reach out to your reseller and try to get that updated. In order to use the tax forms, you must be current on your Sage maintenance plan. For the most part, Sage has moved folks into a subscription-based pricing plan. If some of you are still on the old perpetual license plan, you do have to make sure that you're keeping that maintenance updated with Sage so that you can have access to the updates that you need with your software. Forms that we can get to year-end, the Form 940, the federal unemployment tax return. That's an annual form, even though you have to be doing deposits at least quarterly. Your 941s, your quarterly federal tax returns for the federal withholding and the FICA taxes. The W-2s, those are things that Atrix will help facilitate processing. And these are ones that can be printed without the use of pre-printed forms. Back in the day, the W-2s, we had to have the two-part form, and we had to make sure that everything lined up right. We don't have those hassles as much anymore because all of that can be printed to plain paper. And the federal copy does not have to be read anymore. That was a change that they made a number of years ago. Depending on how you want to do it or what's required of you, it is possible that you have to e-file, and Atrix facilitates the e-filing. They will take your data, they will format it to the way the entity, the jurisdiction wants to see it, and they will get that sent to them. The one thing that is nice about the Atrix interface is that as soon as you send it to them, as soon as you successfully send it to them, they take responsibility of getting it filed on time. So they would handle any late filings. So that's kind of a perk. As far as your state tax forms are concerned, I can really only speak well to Indiana, and I know that the Indiana unemployment form needs to be e-filed. You need to send some sort of electronic data to the state. You can do it through the state's website and key it all in, or you can use Atrix and have that e-filed for you. The Indiana withholding, that is typically reported electronically as well. They've got a pretty nice interface where it's easy to just do the reporting because it's really the total state withheld and the various county withholdings. If you are outside the state of Indiana, please consult with your local CPAs for your requirements. One other thing that is a law in Indiana, if you have 25 or more W-2s that you are issuing, you may only have 18 people employed at this time, but over the course of the year you paid more than 25 people, you must e-file the W-2s for the state. I'll show you how you can split between the options of, I call it a la carte processing of your W-2s. Atrix updates. This is the time of year that they are spitting these out frequently. I have had days where I have been in and actually go in, I get the prompt to do the update, I leave for a little bit, I come back later that day and I get prompted again. So don't be surprised if you get pounded by these updates over the next few weeks. So let's talk about this. What's going on? How do we go about this? I'm going to go ahead and switch back over kind of to a demo mode here and jump into payroll. Again, where we do the, what date we do this for the accounting date really isn't terribly critical. We do have our period end menu and the primary function here, the federal and state tax reporting. This is your Atrix engine. As a reminder, Atrix needs to be installed on any computer that these forms are going to be generated. So if only one person is going to be processing Atrix on his computer or her computer only, that's the only computer where this needs to be installed. If there are multiple people who will be doing these functions, they each have to have Atrix installed. And again, let us know if you need help with that or consult your reseller if you need some assistance. So the first thing that Atrix is going to do, it's going to verify that you have a current Sage Business Care plan or a maintenance subscription. And it goes out and it thinks a little bit, and potentially it might prompt you for, it might give you one more prompt to go through. I've already been on here enough that it confirmed my subscription. So it has taken me to the selection page, and they've consolidated this from versions past. And first we have to pick what kind of form do we want. Do we want a federal form, a state form, or do we want to go back into history to things that we previously had processed? I'm going to go ahead and pick a federal form. I don't have to pick a state since I picked the Fed form. If I picked the state, then I would identify which state I wanted to run. And I get my list of fun and festivity from Atrix. You'll note I have a lot of forms that are prior year. That just basically means that I have not updated my Atrix to get the most current forms, especially here, the 941. You may see 2021 941, but when you go to look for your W-2s, they may still say 2020. That's okay. Go ahead and pick the form, even though it gives you the prior year, because as part of the process, it is going to update for us. I am going to switch my year here because my demo data is in a future year. Some of us may remember the different settings. If you are a not-for-profit or a governmental organization, or you are identified as tax exempt, you must pick one of the options here. Otherwise, the rest of us, none applies. And of course, it's going to go out and check my federal EIN. I did not have one entered in properly, so let me go put one in. You'll see the note here, the telephone number has been expanded to 20 characters, so that's kind of cool if you've got some lengthy phone number. And now I get the prompt to update. The default is the automatic update. We've got options where we can download it or we can continue on expired forms. I don't recommend that, especially if you're trying to do your year end, or we can leave the process. I'm going to opt for the automatic update. It is going to be necessary that you have appropriate permissions on your workstation in order to be able to install the update on your computer. It is also going to be important that you have appropriate internet settings that allows for the Atrix updates to be accessed and downloaded. If you run into issues, again, consult your IT people or consult with your reseller, and we can generally figure out how to fix that for you so that you can get access to get those things downloaded. And of course, this is the time where it's go get another cup of coffee, because it will take a few seconds to get everything downloaded. While that is downloading, let's talk about some issues here. If you get specific errors, there is a website here that you need to add to your internet options. Generally do that in Internet Explorer or Edge, because Sage bases its internet interface through Internet Explorer. There are some security and privacy settings that you need to have some information allowed. And then also, if you're still having issues, have your IT folks check the port to make sure that this particular HTTP port is open through the firewall. And if all else fails, you could potentially manually download the update from the assigned website here. There's a link that will refer you to click on to get the Sage 100 updates. Save that file on your local workstation where your Sage client is installed, and then just go ahead and run that, and then let it walk through its process, and then come back in and relaunch the federal or state e-filing. And if it prompts you for an automatic update again, go ahead and click on the automatic update. It should see everything through that process to know that it has been updated successfully. Still watching a little bit of paint dry, but it is getting close to the end. And once the update completes, it will take you to the form that you had selected. I am getting a strange little warning here because I am reporting for year 2025 because that's where my data is. But I get the encouraging sign that this is the 2021 W-2 form. So that tells me that the Atrix updates are ready for year end, or at least the first phase of them. Atrix walks us into a wizard, and we get some choices here. The first two choices are to do various test drives. You can walk through the test drives with a small group of employees or with all of your employees. I caution against that because if you have to do a lot of corrections, it's only going to print watermarked non-fileable copies. I just go ahead and start processing, because if I need to make corrections, the corrections will get stored. If I need to start over, I can start over. It will confirm your federal ID number, and it will ask you, do you have multiple company files, multiple Sage 100 company files that all file under the same federal employer identification number? If you do, we can consolidate those files so that you can create one filing. Otherwise, your stock answer probably is no. I just use a single file, and I'll go ahead and continue. This will ask to review the company name, the address, if you need to put a correct phone number in. This information does come from your company maintenance. So if this is not updated, you might want to go back and look at Library Master Main company maintenance and get that information corrected, including the federal ID number. Give it a valid phone number. You can fill in this other information here as applicable. It asks, who are you? Are you a paid tax preparer, or are you doing this for your own company employer? I would say probably 99 times out of 100, it's going to be this first option. There's a note here about having 10 or more companies. You could sign up to do the batch e-filing service. Anything e-filing, there are fees that are applied. And then you can get some more information from the link that they display on the wizard window. State and local tax items. I'm going to again speak to Indiana. I know that I would have a state ID here. I know that it would show me my unemployment information. I have an opportunity where I can correct that if necessary. Counties are the taxing jurisdictions in Indiana, so I would have a list of all of the counties that I have recorded taxes for during the course of the year. There may be some extra ones in from previous years if you've been doing this for a while. It gives you the opportunity to identify. Let me go ahead and set one up here real quick. I can see what a county would look like, and you want to make sure that you define it as the appropriate tax type, because that's going to feed the correct tax name that prints on the form. And of course, because I tried to make one up, it got mad at me. Oh, fine. That'll work. There we go. So because I had specified a locality, I do have to specify the state. I've got some questions here. Do I have any employees who are exempt from any part of Medicare or Social Security taxes? Do I have members, do I have employees who are members of the clergy? Do I want to use control numbers? Historically, when these forms were processed by hand, it was nice to have those control numbers on there so that you could make sure that you accounted for every W-2 that you needed. Since we're either e-filing or printing in-house, it's probably not as necessary. If I do pick to use control numbers, I can either put the employee's ID, or I can just use a counter that gets auto-generated. It does ask if I have any employees who have elected to only receive W-2 forms electronically. I would have to specify that, and I would have to have the appropriate settings to be able to send those things electronically. Now I look at the W-3, the summary form, and if I want to use a control number on the W-3, I'm welcome to. I don't have to. I would identify what kind of a payer I am. So what's the quarterly FICA and Medicare with federal withholding tax form that I'm paying against. Generally, it's the 941. Even though I had set this on the first page before I selected to proceed with the W-2 forms, I could change whether I am a non-government entity, 501c3 type of entity, or if I am a state or local or a governmental entity. I can pick which one that I am. Did I file any third-party sick pay? I can go ahead and select that and identify how much that the payer withheld. There's a box here for an establishment number. If another EIN was used during the course of the year, or if, heaven forbid, your business terminated, this would be the indicator to the IRS that not to expect forms next year. Do I want to truncate the Social Security number on the employee copies? I am torn on this, but I lean towards making sure that the Social Security number is printed in full, because the employee would not know that you didn't have their number right if you only showed them the last few digits of their SOCH. So I would be inclined to leave this option as is, but it is absolutely up to you how you want to proceed with that. And now Atrix walks us into a grid which will effectively allow us to review our data and then potentially print our W-2s. And I magically did not pick anybody that was in here in the right company. Cool. I can talk through this. Verify the employee information. On the left-hand side of the grid, we will see what I call the static information. This is the data that prints at the top of the W-2, the name, the address, city, state, and zip, the employee's social security number, and whether or not they are identified as a statutory employee, if they are allowed to partake in the retirement plan, or if they had third-party sick pay. Making these check marks here can lead to future warnings or questions down the road. Just real quick here. You notice I am able to manually add along the way. Not ideal, but if there are corrections that need to be made, this can be a quick way to get some of that information in there. Be careful when you select a state, because it does pop up a list. It doesn't really let you type that in. Once you've reviewed all the employee information, it will take us to the next step, and it will recognize invalid Social Security numbers, either missing ones, or if there are digits that are incorrect or inappropriate. Gives you the opportunity to go back and fix that. It's also a good time to make sure that you have that set correctly in the employee maintenance. Verify the additional employee information. That's the boxes here. Now it wants you to look at the right-hand side of the grid, and this is where all of the dollar information is identified. So I would have my box 1 wages. I made a lot of money that year. Oh, federal withheld. Social wages. Of course, this would cap out. I think that's the right one for this year. And then whatever that number figures out to be, I haven't done the math on that quite yet. Here we go. And again, the math on that. What are my state wages? What's my tax? My local wages? And my local tax. As we proceed through the wizard, we actually do get some warning messages here, and it will let us know where we are wrong with our figures. To make it easy for me to do the math, I'm going to give myself a demotion in pay. Oh, how many zeros did I put in there? Oh, because I had a tip in there that I didn't need. There we go. Okay, you're still being grumpy. 6.2. Oh, because it's 6.2. There we go. 6.2% and 1.45% unless you're over 200,000, and then it adds another 0.9. So now that it's made it through the federal dollars, it's going to confirm the state dollars. And if there's anything else. Now, if I had 401k, if I had health insurance, all of those boxes would appear here, and I can confirm that. You'll see that the totals are up at the top. Makes life a little bit easier to evaluate. I can spread this out or shrink it up if I need to, just so that I can see a little bit better what's going on. Once I'm done reviewing all of my data, I can then proceed. And I'm now getting into the part where I'm going to actually have the opportunity to print or e-file. And by default, Atrix wants you to e-file everything. There is a minimum fee of $24.95. Charges are based on the number of employees. I can do my a la carte selection. Maybe I want to go ahead and print my W-2s internally, and maybe I have enough state employees that I need to e-file, but I don't necessarily have enough employees to e-file federal. I can go ahead and opt for just doing one or the other. Or I don't have to e-file either. I can print my forms, and I can print the state W-2s and reconciliation form so I can get that proper copy. You see the notice here, given the impact of the COVID-19 to the state agencies, your state may have asked that you electronically file, so they may want you to e-file even though you don't necessarily meet the minimum e-filing requirement. I'm going to go ahead and tell it I'm going to e-file. And they throw some advertisements at you here. You're welcome to take advantage of what they offer. Do you want to buy a PDF archive of your W-2s? They do charge you for this. It's an additional $35 plus about $5 for shipping and handling. I tend to say no because this is getting stored as PDFs, and we can always reprint it out to our own PDF and archive it manually without too much effort. As we walk through the remaining part of the wizard here, it offers for which states are you going to electronically file. And you get a synopsis here. What are we going to do? We are going to e-file the federal W-2, W-3. We are going to e-file the Indiana W-2 and WH-3. We are going to physically print the W-2s and possibly the notice, and we'll print our internal copy. Please avoid the temptation to click on print, because all that does for us is to just print a synopsis of this. Go ahead and say next. And at this point, it's going to take us into a graphical version where we get to review yet again the information on the W-2s. as we're proceeding through Atrix, it tells us what copy we're working with. So I'm working with the employee copies. Well, at this point, I can see my 4 copies that each employee will be given. It's difficult to see here, but copy B, copy 2, copy C, and an additional copy 2. So the employee has 4 copies if they are submitting paper copies with their tax returns. Once I have printed those documents, move on to the next step. And I now get the employer copy. So what the employer copy does is it prints 4 employees per page. And I would have, in order, alphabetically, the first 4 employees, and then subsequent pages I would have additional employees. I now get a prompt. I can use the 4-part perforated paper for the employer copy. I tend to be cheap, and I say, no, thank you. I'm going to run that on plain paper because I can always come back and print this again. Now I'm going to get the federal W-2 copy. This is the 2-part that used to go on red stock, does not have to go on red, and everything prints out as far as the grid lines and the titles of the boxes and all of the numbers. And I would get 2 employees per page based on the federal copy. And then I just keep simply walking through the rest of the copies. I get my summary W-3 for the feds. Again, this used to be red printed, pre-printed, does not have to be any longer. You can actually just run this straight to plain paper and it will be perfectly acceptable as a submittable copy. And then I get my state copies. Again, check with your jurisdiction, find out whether they want you to e-file or if it is okay to still print. And again, like the employer copy, I would get 4 employees per page. I get the WH3 summary. This is going to ask me to confirm the dollars of state and local taxes that were submitted. And if I move to the second page, it will make sure that I have the proper local jurisdiction. And now everything looks like it matches. I'm not claiming a refund, telling it how many W-2s I'm attaching. I can go ahead and print that out and send that in. You will notice the due dates. Make note of the due date. This is a little squirrely because this is 2026, and that's going to be a year that January 31st falls on a weekend. I don't believe we have that situation this year, so make sure you watch the paper filing deadline. Typically, it is the 31st or the first Monday after the 31st, if the 31st falls on a weekend. If you have completed everything to your satisfaction, you can agree and continue. If you want to go back, you can double check. If your W-2 4-part perforated forms do not have instructions printed on the back of one of the copies, you must include an instruction sheet with your employee copy of the W-2. If you don't need to print it, you can certainly skip over it. If you're e-filing, you certainly don't need to print it. Because I have opted to e-file, it is going to take me to the Atrix e-file center. If you have not set up credentials with Atrix, you do need to register with them. It's free. You just basically need to identify your federal ID number, a contact, and identify in which jurisdictions, which states you will be filing tax forms. That way it will accommodate the e-filing for any of the other states. Once you get those credentials set up, then you'll come back and you will tell it, I have enrolled and have my login ID. You'll get a temporary password, and you'll be able to get logged in and merely tell it, here's my credit card information, I'm paying for this, and off to the races you go. So that is pretty much the rundown of running at least the W-2 forms. The other forms are very similar in how they get processed. And effectively, you walk through the wizard and you get greeted with information to review to make sure that it all looks up to date. And you go ahead and finalize whether you're printing or e-filing, and those things should get sent out on a timely basis. And the last little tidbit here is the customer portal. If you have a current maintenance subscription customer care plan with Sage, you can be identified to be an authorized contact with Sage, and you can then log into their portal. A number of things that are available out there. The biggest thing is the knowledge base, and it is effectively the same information that the Sage support technicians can reference. There might be a couple of things that they get just because they haven't quite published it out to the portal yet. It's the same knowledge base that we use. So if you've got questions or you want to find out a little bit more information, you can enter search terms in and go hunting. You also get information related to the product, and you get access to the downloads for either the full product or for any of the service packs, whatever the most current service pack is for that version of software. And that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to cover today. I'd like to open up the floor for questions. If anybody has any issues, if anybody would like some assistance, one of the big things I do this time of year, really going into January, is helping clients process their payroll tax forms. I do have availability on my schedule at this point, so you're welcome to acquire some of my time, and I will be happy to help. Awesome. No questions? All right. As a reminder, if anyone needs CPE credit, don't hesitate to contact Leah. Let her know that you attended one or both sessions, and ask her for the CPE letter, and she'll get those out to you probably by the 1st of next week. Awesome. Well, again, thank you very much for sharing your afternoon with me. Hopefully there were a few nuggets of information you were able to glean. And if you do have any questions, you've got access to my contact information. David's contact information was earlier in the presentation. We'll get copies of the recordings out to you. And I will bid you all a very blessed holiday season. And again, thank you for taking your time and spending it with me today.